Unsung for real. Donny Hathaway, Phyllis, Hyman, and my dear friend Doris Troy. With the creation of My Living Memoirs series on Substack, time to revisit some of my earliest posts, with my dulcet tones adding an audio version. In 2007, when I lived in LA, I first heard about the proposed US television series Unsung. One of my neighbours, Jeff Meier, was involved with the company that was producing it for TV One. I recall our conversation about which artists would be amongst those we thought should be included in the first batch for the show, which was designed to provide insight and information on the careers of artists deemed unsung. I remember that we both thought Phyllis, Hyman, and Donny Hathaway were definites, and by the time the first episodes were being put together, I was ensconced in Philadelphia in April 2008 for an unforgettably-forgettable 10 months. The real story behind my use of that description of the city of brotherly love is for another time. I was thrilled to be interviewed for 3 of the first 4 shows, offering commentary on Donny as the only journalist to have interviewed him in the UK on his one visit to London, September 1973, when he was on a brief vacation. Phyllis, with whom I conducted her first interview for Blues and Soul when we were Manhattan neighbours in 1977, and subsequently got to know in the ensuing years, and the DeBarge family, more from an overview of members of the family's career, although I had done stories on Elle, Chico, and Bunny for Blues and Soul at different times in the 80s and 90s. Acknowledging that in the upper reaches of unsung artists, Phyllis, Donny, and others that have featured in the series, with over 150 episodes on TV One, sadly none of which have been available to viewers outside the US, are certainly in the realm of those who deserve further recognition within the music industry and in the media. There's a large cadre of recording artists and performers who have distinguished themselves in the world of soul, R&B, gospel, jazz, and related genres that remain truly unsung. I was very fortunate to be involved with the Rhythm and Blues Foundation as its secretary for a number of years, and had the true joy of working on our Pioneer Awards, mostly an annual event in which we got to give honor and recognition, along with a financial award, to many of the hit makers of the 50s and 60s in particular. More than a few tears flowed when the likes of Baby Washington, Maxine Brown, Don Covey, Dee Dee Warwick, Betty Everett, Gloria Lynn, Ernie K. Doe, and Garnett Mims were among the 100 or so artists, producers, musicians, and songwriters who were recipients of the prestigious Pioneer Awards. Many, if not most, had never received any kind of recognition from the music biz for decades of hard work and little tangible reward. One memory forever etched in my consciousness was when I was with one of the 1996 honorees, when she got the news that she was being recognized. My longtime friend, Mama Soul, my godmother in the music biz, Doris Troy, wept openly when I handed her the phone with a call from the R&B Foundation. I could write pages and pages about Doris, who rose to prominence in 1963 with her timeless anthem, Just One Look. And in fact, when I included a full chapter on Doris and her career in my 1999 book, The Soulful Divas, I got a few comments on why I chose to place her in a tome with legends often known by just their first name. Think Aretha, Nina, Dion, Gladys, Diana, Shaka, Natalie, and so on. My response was always the same. It's my book and my choice to include whoever I want. Doris may not have reached the lofty heights of superstar fame, and yet she was revered for her 60s recordings on Atlantic, cut a Northern Soul classic, I'll Do Anything, co-written with Philly hitmakers Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, worked with the Beatles at Apple Records, and by virtue of Mama, I Want to Sing, the musical co-written by her younger sister Vi Higginson, the famed radio personality in her own right, and her late husband Ken Wydrow, based on Doris's career, got to travel the world playing the role of her own mother. For rock and pop fans, Doris was the voice on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, and the Rolling Stones' You Can't Always Get What You Want. Early on, she was one of the primary background vocalists on sessions with sisters Dion and Dee Dee Warwick for the likes of The Drifters, Solomon Burke, and Chuck Jackson, among others. I spent literally hours and hours in her company over decades in London, LA, and New York, and we were real-life friends. Doris's down-to-earth humor and sass were well known, and she was undoubtedly a woman of faith. We played the card game Uno together. I usually lost, joked around, and I listened to her mother wit words of wisdom. Baby, baby, make sure you get your money. Knowing that she had had her own share of bad dealings within the music biz that were more often than not the lot of black performers in the 60s in particular. I still recall that at the services for Doris, who made her transition at the age of 67 in 2004, Valerie Simpson shared that it was Doris who taught her and then budding songwriting partner Nick Ashford the fundamentals of music publishing back in the day, since Doris herself had begun her own career as a songwriter. Just One Look, a song she co-wrote that was really cut as a demo in the basement studio at 1650 Broadway in 1963, became her theme tune, and a pop music classic. With later use in commercials and films, a source of great pride for Doris. The nature of life, and mine in particular, has had many amazing circuitous events, and no coincidences. When I went into a New York recording studio in 1979 with my good friend John Simmons, who was then starting his tenure as a musical director for Stephanie Mills and then as MD for Whitney Houston during her very first years as a mega hitmaker, to produce a few tracks on Doris, I could never have imagined that decades later, those recordings will be assembled on a CD for all to hear. Listening to the Omnivore album Another Look, released in March 2024, the disco heat of our composition, You Got Me Baby, along with all the bells and whistles reading of It's All in the Game, complete with live string and horn sections, plus sessions I produced in 1980 with Doris, I can only shake my head in wonder. Doris Troy remains, along with so many other for real, salt-of-the-earth, foundational artists in the pantheon of true pioneers in the world of soul and beyond. Ever grateful.